Welcome to DNL Documentaries. Japan is home to the world's largest North Korean community outside the DPRK. Despite being faced with widespread discrimination, this population still professes loyalty to North Korea and goes to great lengths to maintain their connection to their homeland and identity. Our correspondent Yasmin Fanselow investigates how, after decades of living in Japan, this community battles against the tide of Japanese ultra-nationalism and an anti-Korean sentiment. I like them both.
Great.
95-year-old Mr. Peck proudly shows us his latest memento, a badge with Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il, two North Korean leaders vilified as the epitome of evil in the West.
We feel very close to them. We are united. They stand united with us. Together, always together with us.
But Mr. Peck doesn't live in Pyongyang. For decades, he has lived here in Tokyo, Japan, a country that has been hostile to Koreans since it occupied their land at the beginning of the 20th century, especially the 150,000 or so who identify with the DPRK. So how is it that new generations of Koreans born in Japan grow up loyal to the most demonized state in the West? Oh, nice. This is a song from the DPRK. Along with a few other relics Mr. Peck keeps, this is one of the ways he keeps up his connection to his homeland. That's us. So you always listen to this?
Every day.
Every day?
Every day.
Mr. Peck's life has not been easy here, and for younger Koreans, it's not getting easier. Japan is experiencing a resurgence of the extreme right, just like Europe and the US. All foreigners, known as gaijin in Japanese, are increasingly frowned upon, but it's Chosen Koreans, or those who identify with the DPRK, who are in the most danger.
Japanese hate Koreans. This, for your information, is from a public survey conducted by the Sankei Shimbun paper. They say that they do not like Koreans. It clearly shows the opinion of the Japanese people.
Makoto Sakurai is a poster boy of the Japanese far right. Taking his cues from Donald Trump, Sakurai launched the Japan First Party in 2016 and quickly became infamous for his xenophobic views and his scapegoating of Japan's ethnic Korean minority.
They say things like, go back to your country, and you Korean cockroaches. They say things like, kill all the Koreans, good and bad.
This is Kim. He's a 24-year-old student activist and part of Japan's North Korean community.
When we hear this, we feel very intimidated and cannot even use our real Korean names. As a Korean, this creates an inferiority complex towards being Korean.
Modern Japanese racism is inextricably tied to when Japan was Asia's foremost imperial power until it was defeated alongside Nazi Germany at the end of World War II. Japan glorified its bloody colonization across the Asia-Pacific by demonizing its colonial subjects. And right up until today, Japanese society rarely talks about how during that time, hundreds of thousands of Koreans were forced to work in slave-like conditions in Japanese mines and factories as the country industrialized at breakneck speed. Or how when Japan was allied to Nazi Germany against the Allies in World War II, Korean men were conscripted in the army and sent to some of the harshest fronts where they faced probable death. Meanwhile, Japan imposed extreme assimilation policies on Koreans, forcing Japanese citizenship on them. They even had to change their names to Japanese ones, while their newspapers and schools were shut down. So kids were unable to learn Korean, but they were taught anthems of Nazi Germany in Japanese schools, which Mr. Peck still remembers.
Raise the flag, the ranks tightly closed. The SA marches. You know the SA. This is their song. We learned this at school. It was popular among the students.
SR, you know? SR. 학생들 유행하고 있었어요. Popular.
It's popular. When the Japanese Empire fell in 1945, most Koreans returned home, but approximately 600,000 stayed in Japan. The government then stripped ethnic Koreans of the Japanese citizenship that had been forced on them. And years later, when they'd be allowed to get it back, many refused, even though it would mean more political rights and freedom to travel.
I've never visited DPRK. I've visited South Korea, but I don't consider South Korea my home or homeland. That's definitely where my ancestors came from. That's the country where my grandma and grandpa grew up. But I feel still that Japan is the bigger part of me in terms of country. And yet, I don't want to be naturalized. I don't want to be invisible. And I feel like being a Korean with a special permanent residency, I feel like I'm a living evidence of Japan's colonial past.
Koreans who identify with North Korea refer to themselves as Chosen Koreans. They make up roughly a quarter of the total Korean population living here. Mr. Koo runs a gaming parlor known as a pachinko. Pachinkos became the economic bedrock of the Chosen community.
でなったんですけども、なんでこんなにこの在日コリアンがこのパチンコの仕事を
The reason why there are so many Koreans doing this type of work is because we were unable to get work in regular companies after the war. So Koreans opened these sorts of businesses because they were the jobs that the Japanese didn't want to do.
仕事しかなかったからパチンコとそういうホルモンの焼肉の仕事を始めて、で今
Today, Chosen Koreans' pachinko and restaurant businesses are thriving here, and their profits are major contributors to an organization called the Cheongryun. Founded over 60 years ago, the Cheongryun remains one of two bodies that represents Koreans in Japan. Tied to the DPRK, it has fought for decades to protect Korean culture and language, a difficult task in a country as ethnocentric as Japan. The DPRK has historically funded the community and its network of schools. And people here have not forgotten that, which partly explains why political support for Pyongyang remains strong in the community. But that doesn't necessarily mean absolute loyalty to the DPRK for everyone. For some, it's about something much more simple, a stateless people maintaining their identity in the face of adversity.
We
don't have a single right which was given by Japan to us without our own initiative. We fought and won. We collected signatures, made requests, took it to the ministries where demands were made. We acquired our rights. There is a history of civil struggle, and the Cheongryun directed us in what to do.
Mr. Kang is also a member of the Cheongryun. His family have been in the restaurant business, which support the organization financially, for 3 generations.
ここは50年ぐらい前におばあちゃん
About 50 years ago, my grandmother came to Japan. Most of the restaurants in this street belong to Zainichi Koreans. The owners are the 2nd or 3rd generations of their families working here. This is my big brother's restaurant. This is the biggest restaurant. Let's go inside. Hey, we're going to film in the kitchen. We're coming in.
よかったら中見てみますか。はい。ナナもう一回キッチンに入るっつって、ナナもう一回キッチンに入るよってそのまま撮影したまんま。
The Cheongryun run around 70 schools which aim to keep Korean children connected to their language and community. They're especially valued because they offer an alternative to Japanese schools, which teach a glorified version of the history which is so painful for Koreans.
After the war, Germany criticized those who supported Nazism. Japan didn't do that.
When I was growing up, I never heard that Japan was actually a perpetrator country too. They feel like they are being personally attacked for the things that happened years before they were even born.
There is no anti-Japanese rhetoric. There is a stance against imperialism, of invading and taking over the other countries. We as graduates of Korean schools don't agree with the imperialism. We absolutely hate it.
帝国主義嫌い、大嫌い。
This scene might look like the stereotype we constantly see in the West, brainwashed North Koreans who blindly worship the DPRK and its leaders. But that's not really what I found. I was actually surprised at how much nuance there is amongst Joseon Koreans in their views towards their homeland.
The students are very critical. They actually are exposed to multiple news sources. Like they don't only watch Japanese news, but they also watch South Korean news, and they also hear what North Korean government is saying about particular issues, and they think very deeply what is true, or how truth is kind of fabricated or created by the media. So I think I would definitely say that they're actually existing at the very opposite of being brainwashed.
일본 신문이랑은 일본 마스코미는 우리를 갖다가
The Japanese media talk about us as if we worship Kim Il-sung, but that's not how we think. We just feel close to him. To us, he's a friendly figure. We are in Japan, so who's forcing us to think like this? South Korea says they've economically better developed, but South Korean government never sent money to support Koreans in Japan. They didn't even send us a single book or notebook.
The Cheongryang community goes to great lengths to keep its connection to Korea alive. Here in this museum, a vast range of rock, plant, and even animal specimens that the organization has collected from the DPRK are on display. It may seem a bit weird, but this community love it. It's one of the many ways they maintain familiarity with a country that embraces them as they are, while their Japanese home and its society treats them as outcasts.
My hometown is here. Mine is here in the southern part of the peninsula.
Mine is here in Gyeongsang-bukdo. This is my hometown.
But the Japanese government doesn't always take kindly to mementos brought in from the DPRK. So yesterday, students from a Korean school returned from Pyongyang to Tokyo. Their souvenirs were confiscated at the airport, and Cheongryang officials gave us a call today. They want us to attend a press conference, so we're about to go in and find out what's going on.
There is no doubt that this unjust act was carried out on the orders of the Japanese government. Japan is harassing these people. I think that this qualifies as a criminal act internationally.
Japan's authorities are also facing Cheongryang students and teachers in court over discrimination. Their schools are the only ones nationwide that are excluded from state subsidies, forcing parents to pay high tuition fees. And on the way to school, pupils have to reckon with the threat of violent far-right groups.
Sometimes we receive phone calls telling us, go home to Korea. If you don't like Japan, go back to Korea. This happens a lot.
Pupils are too afraid to even wear their traditional Korean uniforms, called the chugori, to school. Here they are wearing Japanese uniform. And here, now they are safely through the school gates, they've changed into their chugoris.
Before, we used to go to school, but now the situation is too tense. I find it heartbreaking.
Dr. Kyung says it's exactly this atmosphere, which makes Koreans feel like they have to hide their identity, that provokes those born in Japan to cling onto their roots even more firmly.
If you talk about headscarf, and in France, for example, when anti-Muslim violence escalated, the number of people who wore scarf rose. When you face discrimination because of who you are, I think you inevitably feel that you need to protect, who you are.
Korean students thrive on adversity. When they are targeted, they fight back. Many of us have grown up in these kinds of circumstances.
風に育つ子が多いと思います。
And so even those ethnic Koreans who have naturalized as Japanese citizens and are objectively much more Japanese than Korean, the louder anti-Korean voices get, the closer the Cheonggyeon community comes together.
A lot of people have already naturalized as Japanese citizens, and they are full members of the society in a political sense. They have a vote, they can vote. And many community members of Cheonggyeon do not choose that route intentionally. They have already learned from other people's struggles, like civil rights movement in the United States, that the citizenship by itself would not guarantee you to participate in the society fully.
In the West, citizenship doesn't mean much if you're Black, Muslim, Jewish, Roma, or a member of some other minority which is the punchbag of the day or era. It's the same for Koreans in Japan. The desire to simply be treated as a human being and not some other label like resident, citizen, immigrant, asylum seeker, displaced person, and so on. That's not to say the political rights that each generation of Koreans in Japan have fought so hard for don't mean something. This is why they're so determined to keep the memory of that struggle alive, through their Cheonggyeon and through their schools, so that future generations can avoid repeating the worst horrors their ancestors lived through, not least war, a spectre which continues to linger over the Korean peninsula.
조선 사람이 바라는 것이 두 가지 있습니다. 하나는 절대로 두 번 다시
Jesse and Koreans wish for two things: that we are never colonized again like we were by Imperial Japan. The second is that we don't want another war. North or south, rich or poor, it's no good for anybody.
돈 있는 사람이건 돈 없는 사람이건 뭐 이건 절대로